Today we're going to cover how to use source material in a document, which means that you're going to be quoting, paraphrasing, and or summarizing. So to integrate, you have three options: to quote, which means to use the exact wording from your source, put it in quotation marks, and credit the source that you're taking it from; to paraphrase, which means to put the other source's information into your own words, not using quotation marks, but still giving credit to the original source; and then to summarize, which means that you're putting higher level information, main points, key points, into your own wording rather than using word for word, and you're not including quotation marks, but you are still giving credit. So let's take a deeper dive into these. So a quote is a word-for-word reproduction of a source's wording, and that means that you have to put it in quotation marks. Typically, you will also have to indicate where the source came from, so you can do this multiple different ways, as we'll see as an example. But also keep in mind that if you need a citation style, you also have to follow citation style rules. Generally, you'll be asked to avoid what's called a drop quote, particularly in undergraduate writing. And a drop quote is when you just drop a whole quoted sentence into a paragraph. There's no warm-up, there's no follow-up to show how it's fitting into the paragraph, how it's working with the rest of the material. And there's three common ways that we introduce a quote, so it's not just dropped in there, and that we're making transitions and connections. The first way is to use what's called a signal phrase, and I think this is one of the easiest ways. So for example, you're using a phrase like "according to Jones," and then quote. But basically this is anytime you use the author or speaker's name and then a verb of some sort. So Jones said, Jones claims, Jones found, etc. And you do want some variety so that you don't just keep saying according to, according to. Another way is to use the colon, which is where you have a full sentence that ends with a colon and then a partial or full sentence of quote that follows. So for example, most instructors find that students struggle to cite correctly. That is a full sentence, but instead of ending with a period, we're going to end with a colon and then provide a quote, either, again, partial or full sentence of quote. And the last one is the most difficult because you have to work the quote into your sentence. So you start with your own wording, and somewhere, usually at least 3 words in, you would switch to the quoted material. And this is a little bit more difficult because your sentence with your words and the quote together have to be grammatically correct, make up one sentence. And the way to check that is to look at it without the quotes. Does that make one full sentence? Is it clear? But obviously put the quotes back in when you're ready to finalize it. So for example, in college, new writing students experience quote difficulty using APA formatting, especially when it is their first attempt. One cause for concern, potentially, is that you might want to overuse quotes because it's easy, right? It's easier to just grab a bunch of quotes from other people and do less of your own writing. However, that's a problem because you don't want to just have quote, 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 I'm done, I wrote a paper. That is actually not your paper if you are just using a bunch of other people's quotes strung together. So you want to be picky about when you are actually going to quote. Some reasons to quote include that you need the authority of the writer or the speaker or their expertise, or you want the reputation of the original source. If they use powerful wording or you think they have the perfect expression, you can choose to quote. So for example, think of Martin Luther King Jr.'s "I Have a Dream" speech, and can you effectively translate "I have a dream" into your own wording? Possibly, but it's not going to have the power of the original. You can also quote because you need to demonstrate accuracy, or if you are unable to accurately put their wording into your own wording, it's a good reason to use quote. if you want to provide some variety in voices or writing styles. Some people pick up on this really well, other people don't pick up on it as quickly, but when you have different people writing, it sounds very different. It sounds like different people speaking, and so typically you can tell when there's a shift in voice and style, and it would allow people to have some variety to see quotes in a document. And then also, if you are conducting primary research, so for example, you go out and you interview people, or you go out and you conduct focus groups, or you have people do open-ended questions on a questionnaire, you can pull their responses and quote them in your paper or your document as an example of your research findings. But remember, don't overuse quotes. If you're not doing primary research, you really want to limit how many you use, just so again you can maintain that creative ownership of your paper and meet assignment expectations. Now there's just really a rule of thumb here, but instructors sometimes put specific limits on their requirements. So for example, when I have students write a paper that's an APA paper that does not use primary research like interviews, I will limit them to 10% of quoted material. So for example, if you write a 1,000 word paper or document, only 100 words can be quoted throughout the entire piece. Some people go as high as 20%. I've never seen people go higher than 20% as far as allowing quoted material, but if you're not sure, check with your instructors. And then if you're writing a technical document, like a workplace writing type document, like a report or a memo, typically technical writing uses quotes less often than academic writing, and I would encourage you to stay somewhere between 0 and 10%. Next up for options on how you can incorporate source material is paraphrasing. So paraphrasing, para means next to, and phrase, so you can think of it as next to the original phrasing, similar to it. But basically that's when you take a small chunk of information. For example, your source has 1 to 3 sentences that you really like the information in those sentences, but you can't quote them, or you shouldn't quote them because you're already quoting too much. Another option is that you can paraphrase those sentences, which means you're taking that information, but you're putting it in your own wording at roughly the same length and level of detail. So for example, if you have 2 sentences in the source, you would write roughly 2 sentences of the same length in your own wording, including small details like facts, specific numbers, quotes if you need to, etc. Then you also have this concern, though, that paraphrasing is where people can accidentally plagiarize, and the reason why is that you're keeping the same information, same level of detail, and you're trying to put it in your own wording. And the problem with that is, how different can you make this information, in your own wording? So the idea is that the information should be the same, but your words and your word structure should be different. And that's hard to do. It takes practice for most people. So looking at some examples here, if the original quote is from the source, students often have difficulty using APA formatting, especially when it is their first time. We can paraphrase it as, because APA is so difficult to learn, students can struggle when trying to use the documentation style for the first time. So we have the same information, but a different sentence structure, and the majority of the words are different. But we're hitting on the same key details, using APA, learning it, using it the first time, causing difficulty or struggles. So those are the details we needed to include for paraphrasing, but we put it in different word structure, sentence structure here, and different wording. However, if you notice, there are some words that are in orange that are the same between the original and the paraphrase. So APA, difficult, which is similar to difficulty, students, and first. And for words in a different order, in a different sentence structure is not cause for concern, 1. 2, these words are actually difficult to put into your own wording or to use a synonym. So for example, if you think about the word students, is there a word that means the same thing but is different? So it's a synonym to the word students. And most people would say, well, maybe pupils. But 1, we don't use the word pupil very often because it's just like outdated, outmoded language we don't typically use anymore. And 2, if we do use the word pupil, it's typically to describe a younger student. So if you are talking about grade school, for example, that would work, but it doesn't fit as well for high school students or college students, who would be the ones actually learning APA style. So if there's no synonym that works well here, you can just use the same word, students. It's okay, again, as long as no more than 3 words in a row are the same and you're using different sentence structure, you would not get called out for plagiarism. APA is another example. So APA stands for American Psychological Association. It's an acronym, and it is a proper noun, which means that you can't change it. There's no synonym for a proper noun. So you would just want to leave it. If you change it and you said, citation styles are difficult to learn, you lose some of the specificity that you're talking specifically about APA. So it's better to just leave it in. Difficult and difficulty are very similar. You could try to come up with a different word like hard and throw that in if you wanted. But again, if it's only 4 words in a different sentence pattern, it's not a big deal if you use difficult and the original uses difficulty. And then first time, you could change it. First attempt, first time are similar. I think they're different enough. If you really wanted to change it, you could change it to like when they're beginning to use the style or something like that. But this would be an okay paraphrase. You would not get in trouble for plagiarism. So some reasons to paraphrase. I know people don't always like paraphrasing and they're afraid to paraphrase because they might accidentally plagiarize, but paraphrasing is actually very useful. It helps you avoid overusing quotes. So remember, you'll have some kind of restriction on how much of your document can be quoted, and you can use as much paraphrase as you want. Right, so you can paraphrase here, paraphrase there throughout your paper. As long as the paragraphs you are writing are your paragraphs that you're constructing. One note here, you do not want to paraphrase someone's entire document and then say this is my document. Because again, if you're just changing the wording, the word order, but all the sentences are covering the same thing, the whole document is the same information, that is again an example of plagiarism. So you can use paraphrase here and there, but you need to build your own paragraphs and make sure you have your own topic sentences, etc. Another reason to paraphrase is that you can change the organization of ideas and emphasis when you can't do that with quoting because you have to keep things exactly the same. You can also try to simplify the material, leave out some few details. You still are including the important details, but if there's something or a couple things that are really not important, you can leave those out when you're putting things in your own wording. You can also try to simplify language. This is an issue when people are using sources that are highly academic. Unfortunately, some people still try to write in a very high-level language to sound smart, but then they're actually confusing most of their readers. So if you have somebody that you are trying to include their information in your document, but their language is so high level and confusing, paraphrasing is the opportunity to put it in a much simpler way that's more understandable to a general audience. And of course, you can provide that clear information quickly with paraphrase. The last option is summary. And summary is when you take something that is bigger, the original is bigger, and you're trying to make it smaller. So you're taking just the main point or some main points out of the source, and you're leaving all of the details out. So all of those small minor pieces of information, you don't have time to include those, you have to leave them out. But how much you summarize is up to you. So for example, if you have a 30-page article and you want to use some of the information, you could summarize that whole article down into a one-page summary. For example, you would pick 3 to 5 of the main points and write a paragraph or so for each of those main points. Or you could take a 30-page article and turn it into one paragraph. That means you have fewer points or fewer supporting details for each point that you're going to include to get it down to one paragraph. Or you could write just one sentence. So very high level, just what's the overall focus of this 30-page article. You could put that into just one sentence for your reader. And summary can seem intimidating, but we actually do it every day as humans. It's part of how we work, how we live, how we survive. We just don't always do it in writing. We usually verbalize it, so it can be a little bit harder to think about it as, okay, now I have to summarize this in writing. But you do it all the time. So for example, think about going to a movie, and if you went to a movie, someone afterward might say, oh, what was that movie about? And they're not expecting you to step by step go through line by line and recount the movie, right, over 2 hours. They're expecting you to give them a super quick, high level overview of what the movie is about. And they probably don't even want you to tell them the ending, right? Maybe, maybe not. It kind of depends on the person. But if they're planning to see the movie, they wouldn't want to know any surprises or, how things wrap up. But you can take a whole 2-hour movie and summarize it down. So for example, I have some Disney movie plots here because Disney movies are very popular. So the first one, a prince's uncle kills the father. The prince runs away and grows up, and then the prince returns to claim his rightful place as king. And if you are a Disney buff, you would say, oh, that's the Lion King. Even though I didn't mention lions, that best fits for Disney films, the Lion King. But I do want to point out, if you're so high level that you're removing all these specific details, you could actually be telling the summary of multiple plots. So I wanted to give this one as an example because this summary would also fit the play Hamlet by Shakespeare. So you want to be careful, sneak in little pieces of information here and there to make sure that your reader knows what you're summarizing and it makes sense to them. So for example, you would want to introduce this as a plot of a Disney movie. That helps. And you may also want to say a lion, right? And that'll help the reader know, yep, you're talking about the Lion King. Another example, mermaid falls in love with prince. Mermaid makes a deal with a sea witch to trade her voice to be human. The sea witch tries to steal the prince, and the mermaid wins back her voice and the prince. And everybody would say, yep, that story is Cinderella. Just kidding. No, that is The Little Mermaid. So very high level. We lost a lot of the drama and the detail, but we have an overall idea of what the plot is for The Little Mermaid. If you're looking at a written source, there are some ways that people give away what their focus is. One nice way is with section headings. So for example, if the section is broken, or the paper or document is broken into sections, each section will have a focus, and that can help you figure out, okay, well, this is what's really important. They're identifying it with their section breaks and their section headings. so that's nice. If the document does not have headings, though, you can still go through paragraph by paragraph and say, okay, this paragraph is about job satisfaction. This paragraph is about how long employees stay on the job. This paragraph is about sense of organizational belonging, etc. And then once you look, pull back a higher level view, you can go through and see, okay, it talks about all these things. Which are the most important main points that my reader needs to know about? But no matter what, with summary, you're going to have to leave out the supporting details from the original. So, for example, specific numbers, statistics, dates, facts, quotes, historical dates, events that were happening, you're going to have to leave that out. You don't have time to include that in a summary. So there are various ways to go about summarizing. I'm going to give you an example of what I would do in 3 parts here. So you could look at this as kind of a type of worksheet. So part 1, you want to record the source information, so the publication information. Who is the author or the speaker? What's the title? What is the date of publication? And this information is important so that you can find your source later, but also so your reader knows what you're summarizing. You want to slip some of that information into your document. Part 2, you'll want to introduce the author and the title in a 1-sentence summary, usually, so that your reader knows what you're talking about and gets a very high-level glimpse of what the source is. So for example, there's a template here, the article, and then you provide the title of the article, by author, so you're providing the name, is about what? And you provide the overall focus. So an example from a real article, which you can find the URL here on the left-hand side, I'm going to give you an example 1-sentence summary of that also names the author and title. In the article, average college degree pays off by age 34. Katie Lebosco calms the financial fears of college students, graduates, and potential writers worried about paying off their student loan debt. So we have the title, so we know which article we're talking about. We have the author, which is nice to include because, she wrote it, so give her the credit. And then we also have a very high-level 1-sentence summary of what it's about. She's calming the fears of students and potential students about student loan debt. Then we're going to move on to part 3, where we would identify some main points. So using the same source here, I would go through, and depending on the length of your summary, you can focus on just one main point, or you could find a few main points. But I'm going to look at 4 here because coincidentally I feel there are 4 main points throughout her entire article. So main point number 1, while there are some anecdotal horror stories, college graduates pay off their student debt on average within 12 years of graduation. Point number 2, again, this is me putting the information in my own wording already. Point number 2, college graduates make more than high school graduates on average. Point number 3, more high school students are unemployed and struggle to find work than college graduates. And point number 4, the benefits of higher education, which include healthier and more civic lifestyles, last a lifetime. So I have my 1-sentence introduction with the author and the title and the high-level overview. I've got 4 main points here that I've spent 1 sentence each identifying. Please note that you can trim this down by smushing them all into 1 or 2 sentences if you want. But I want to show you how I would turn this into a paragraph. So if I needed to write a whole paragraph about her article, I would do it like this. In the article, average college degree pays off by age 34. Katie Lebosco calms the financial fears of college students, graduates, and potential students worried about paying off their student loan debt. While there are some anecdotal horror stories, college graduates pay off their student debt within 12 years on average. A college degree boosts the holder's income potential and employability. On average, college students make almost $10,000 more than high school graduates per year. And investing in a college degree is less risky than most people think. So that's a transition there. More high school graduates are unemployed and struggle to find work than college graduates. Plus, the benefits of higher education, which go beyond income and employability to include healthier and more civic lifestyles, last a lifetime. So putting it all together, I've smushed all of her main points into my paragraph, and I've included where needed some transitional sentences to make it all flow together, transitional phrase, word, or sentence. And what ends up happening is her main points become my paragraph's supporting details, right? So where she wrote a paragraph or two about each of these points, I turned it into one sentence for each of these points and smushed that into my paragraph, and her main points are now my supporting details. So there's a lot of reasons to use summary, just like paraphrase. First and foremost, people think summary is easier than paraphrasing. So, if you're more comfortable with it, go ahead and do that. You'll avoid overusing quotes. So again, if you're at your maximum percentage of quoted material, you can rely on summary, doing as much summary and paraphrasing as you want. You can, again, change the organization of ideas and emphasis. You can simplify materials now by leaving out all of the details, and you can even leave out main points from the source that you don't think are relevant. You can simplify the language, again, make it easier for your reader to understand. And you can provide clear, relevant information much more quickly than trying to quote the original source.